In a lot of the videos that I make on YouTube, I often get questions in the comments asking for advice or asking for specific help with certain problems. So this week I created a community post asking if my subscribers had any questions that they wanted answering. And in today's video, I'm going to do my very best to help and answer them. So let's get into it. So we have a question from Arthur that says, how do I improvise any song and harmonize the chords? By the way, love your videos. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Ashlyn Swartzentruber also asked, how to arrange songs in a more beautiful way. This is a very broad question because it depends what you actually want to do with the song that you're trying to improvise over. Generally speaking, if you are trying to play something on the piano, you need the two main elements, which is the harmony and the melody. So the harmony is the chords and the melody is the melody. And from those two elements, you need to work out what the scale is that that song is using. So for example, if the melody in that song happens to be using all of these white notes, then that means you're probably going to be in C major, and therefore the scale is a C major scale. Now, for the most part, the thing that is not going to change is the melody. The melody is the thing that's going to make the song the most recognizable. Anything else in the song you can play around with. So the rhythm of the song, the chords that are in the song, the way that you play the chords in the song, you can change. So for example, if I just take a random song, 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton, the melody for that song goes something like this. And the chords go like this. So together, you would have something like this. And that literally is just playing the most basic form of those chords with the melody. Now, if you can do that with any song that you are trying to play on the piano, then it's just a case of experimenting with the chords and trying to make it sound more interesting and understanding what effects that is going to have on how the music sounds. So for example, if I move all of that up one octave on the piano, so I'm playing a higher version of it, how is that going to affect the sound? It's probably going to make it sound more delicate and twinkly. So if I want to really lean into that, I might thin the texture out and just play a single note, for example, instead of the full chord. So you might get something like this. Alternatively, if I wanted to do the exact opposite and make it not twinkly and sparse, and instead wanted to make it sound more thick and big, then I can spread myself across more of the piano and thicken that texture by playing more notes. So for example, with this first chord, I have an E chord, which is E, G sharp and B. If I play E, B, E, G sharp, B, E, which is all still E's, G sharps and B's, then that will make it sound much more thick because I'm spreading it out over more of the piano. There are loads of ways that you can break chords up to make certain patterns that have a certain quality of sound and feeling attached to them. I actually did a video with 30 different ways that you can play a chord on the piano, and each one of those ways of playing a chord has a different feeling. But as I said, you can actually change most elements of a song as long as you retain something that is recognizable from the song, like the melody. So I could even reharmonize this song, which means to change the chords in the song. And to reharmonize a song, generally all you need to do is find other chords that work with the melody note that you're playing at the time. So for example, to start with, I might stick to the same chords, but here I might change the chord to keep going up the scale because I've gone E, F sharp, G sharp, and this will work with this note here because it's part of the chord. In this case, that's G sharp minor, which is G sharp, B, and D sharp, and the melody is a D sharp here. So firstly, I would play just the simple chords in the left hand and the melody in the right hand so that you know you've got the basic elements of the song. Then try and start experimenting with how you play those chords, especially in the left hand. And then you can experiment with trying to change some of those chords to see if you can find a unique and different sound. But by far, the most important thing about improvising a song on the piano is to grade the song so that it kind of unfolds and it isn't all just one note, let's say. So it's how you get from that high-pitched thinner sound to that more broad, thicker sound throughout the song. Or vice versa, starting thick and becoming thin. Either way, when you're improvising a song on the piano, it always sounds better if you start somewhere and you develop the song to get somewhere else. So that might be like this, for example. How to improvise a song on the piano is quite a large topic, so obviously it's difficult to go into a massive amount of detail, but I do have a lot of videos on how to work out songs by ear, how to work out chords, how to work out scales, those kind of things. Okay, Voldemar asks, how can I practice to reduce the tension in my hands and stay relaxed? Okay, so if you have tension in your hands, then it depends what you're doing in order to cause that tension. For the most part, most players don't have tension all of the time. For example, if I just said play a C on the piano, most people can play that without tension in their hand. If you do have tension in your hand playing a single note like that, then play the note and rotate your hand around like this to make sure that you stay loose, because you can't be tense while moving. However, if it's not every single time you press any key on the piano, then the tension will be caused by a specific thing that you're doing. Most of the time, tension is caused by you trying to force your hand to do something that it's not accustomed to on the piano. For example, if you are trying to play scales really fast and you get real tense hands doing that, try and play it at a speed where you don't feel any tension at all and that you can stay relaxed and move your hand around. If you can do that, then you know that the scale is not causing the tension. The speed is causing the tension. And let's be honest, most of the time it's trying to play something fast that causes tension. But if it's speed that's causing tension, then break down what you're trying to play into really small fragments where you can actively release your hand and wrist at the end of it. So in the case of a scale, you might play the first 4 notes. And make sure that your hand stays nice and relaxed when you finish those 4 notes. And then try and accumulate the notes. And as soon as you start to feel tension in your hand or wrist again, then take a step back or slow it down just slightly to try and get rid of that tension. Essentially, you're trying to find the point at which you are becoming tense. Then you need to build in moments into that section where you actively release your hands and wrists. Tension is usually quite difficult to get rid of in students playing because the reason that they got tense in the first place is usually because of impatience and trying to force your way into playing something correctly rather than relaxing and getting your hand used to playing it correctly. But once again, it'd be useful to know the exact situation where you're finding tension in your hand so I can give a more specific answer. Okay, Xander says, hi, I recently commented on your video about the way different musicians play the same piece. I've recently discovered your YouTube account by sheer coincidence, and I could never be happier. I was literally about to quit the piano and was planning to break the news to my family and teacher the next day when I discovered your amazing channel that brought me joy and inspiration. I watched your video about reacting to someone who had learned the piano for 1 year, and that is where I found my joy again. I found Mozart Sonata number 16, K545, in that video and started to learn it from sheet music yesterday, and I can't express my gratitude for you helping me in those dark times, even if it was not your main intention. I turned 16 a while back and piano had started to lose its grip before I found your channel. Thanks, Matthew. My question is, could you in any way help me with this piece? Give me pointers and places that are the best practices. Well, firstly, thank you very much for that message. I'm glad I can provide some level of inspiration. I remember when I was around 16 and I used to get a lot of inspiration from seeing people play pieces that I thought were really cool. And they seemed incredibly difficult, but that is one of the reasons why I enjoy making videos on this channel, because I hope to some degree I can inspire people to play the piano. So, Mozart Sonata K545. The first thing I would say about this piece is try and work out what the chords are in the piece, and also try and work out the features and the repeating features within the piece. So firstly, the chords. For example, bar 1 is a C major chord. Chord 2 in the piece is a G7 chord, which feels like it wants to go back to C. A G chord is chord 5 in C because it's the chord based on note 5 in the scale. So a G chord is GBD, and G7 is GBD and F. Chord 5 in any scale with a 7th on it is something called a dominant 7th. In music, dominant just means 5. It means note 5 in the scale or chord 5. So a dominant 7th is chord 5 with the 7th on top. Whenever you see chord 5 with the 7th on top, it always feels like it wants to go back to chord 1, and therefore it adds some tension that feels like it needs to be released by going back to chord 1. If you can notice the chords in this piece, so when is it chord 1, so C major? When is it chord 5 with the 7th on it, so that it feels like it wants to go back to chord 1? When is it a minor chord, for example? All of these things will help you characterize this piece of music. So in the first 4 bars, you have chord 1, C major, chord 5 with the 7th on it, chord 1, chord 4, chord 1, chord 5 with the 7th on it, and then chord 1. So each time you hear that chord 5 going back to the chord 1, it's like a tension and release. Then after that, you have a series of scales, and it's kind of important to make this feel like it's flowing to the top and the bottom. So I would probably try and make sure that you play the first note and make it feel like it's kind of falling all the way to the top note. And then back down again. And then back up. And then back down again. and so on. In pieces like this, you might be able to see when something is a scale, and you might be able to see when something is a chord, but you've got to go one level beyond that and say, what do those things mean about how it sounds and how it feels? With these scales, it feels like it's cascading down. With the chords, it often feels like there's a tension with chord 5 and a release with chord 1. These features in the music will help you understand how the music should feel, and if you exaggerate those things, then to a listener, they're going to understand the music more. This is also a piece where I would think about the structure, because sonatas have a very specific structure. It's usually an ABA structure, so you have the exposition, which is section A, and this usually has two themes. You have one musical idea, and then you have another musical idea. Then you have the development section, which is section B, and that takes those two musical ideas and develops them. So you'll have those two themes kind of showing up together, or upside down, or in a minor key instead of a major key, those kind of things. And then at the end of the piece, you get section A returning again. So this feels really comfortable and familiar when it does return. So when learning and reading through this piece of music, I'd work out where each of those sections are within the piece of music, so that you know how it all fits together and which part of the narrative and the story that you are in. Bonjour Clavo asked, how do you know when to use the right fingers when sight reading? Because when I sight read, I just feel like I'm using the wrong fingers. It would be helpful if you could make a video of yourself sight reading a piece explaining how to always use the right fingers. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So firstly, I'll sight read something and then I'll explain the process that I'm going through. So this is Fauré's Opus 17 number 1. It's a romance. It's in A flat major. It says andante quasi allegretto, which means kind of walking pace, but it should feel kind of like it's pushing slightly. Relatively quiet. It has a very clear melody over the top, and then everything else seems to be kind of chord based. And it's in 3/4, so it's likely going to have kind of a bit more of a dancey quality to it. Now, obviously, that was by no means perfect, but that is exactly what sight reading is. Sight reading is never there to replace actually learning a piece of music. It's there to help you learn pieces of music a lot faster, and it's also there if you need to quickly jump on the piano and accompany someone or something like that, and you need to kind of play a good enough version of a piece. And this is why, when it comes to the fingers that you use for sight reading, there are a few things that I would say. First of all, try and always have your peripheral vision slightly ahead to see if there are any notes coming up that are outside where your hand actually is. So for example, in the first 2 bars of this piece, I can see that the highest notes that I'm playing is a C and a D flat in that first bar, and then the melody kind of comes back down again. So therefore, for those top notes, I'm going to try and use that side of my hand. But you will not get that right all of the time when you're sight reading. Sometimes you will run out of fingers, and you'll have to just play whichever fingers are available, or you'll have to jump in order to get to certain notes. Sight reading is a game of prioritization. So for me, when I'm reading a piece of music like this, the first thing I'm thinking is that bass note is very important, because that is giving the foundation of the chord. And then the melody is really important because that's the thing that people are listening to. The notes in between are less important, and the fingers that I use to play those notes are much, much less important. So yes, it's great if I can get all of the notes right, and yes, it's great if I could glance ahead enough to make sure I have enough fingers to play all the notes that I needed to be playing. But it's also okay to ignore certain notes or certain fingers and try and just keep going, because sight reading is all about keeping going despite missing things. Hi, I started playing piano, or rather learning, a year back, and I've watched your videos on how to teach yourself piano and learned a couple of things. I was wondering if you could help me with the fundamentals of writing a song from start to end, please. Once again, a question asking me to explain everything that there is to know about music. My general advice for writing pieces of music is 1, once again, consider the structure that you want to write in. 2, think about the style and sentiment that you're trying to create. And 3, think about whether you want to do chords first or melodies first. So for structure, if you are writing a typical pop song, for example, then you're going to want a set of chords and a melody for the verse. You're going to want a set of chords and a melody for the chorus, and you'll want a set of chords and a melody for the bridge section, and then you just piece it together. So you have verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, for example. For a classical piece, you might have ABA structure, like a sonata, for example, or you might have ABACADA, like a rondo form, for example. The reason that I think you should consider the structure first is because that will help you kind of narrow down what you're actually trying to do on the piano. If you're sitting there thinking, what do I play and where is this going? Then that becomes very difficult mentally to try and do. Whereas if you know you're trying to create a verse which has got to be less than a chorus and it's got a limited set of features, then that's much easier to think about. Secondly, thinking about the style and the sentiment. If you are trying to create something that's jazzy, for example, that's going to have very different qualities to something that is like a nightclub tune. Something jazzy might be... Whereas if you're trying to create something that's more of a dance track, then it might be something like this. Both of which have their own features and idiosyncrasies. But once you know which style and genre you want to play, and you have some kind of structure that's probably associated with that style, then you're going to need to decide whether you want to do chords first or melody first. If you have a melody idea, then you can work out chords that work with that melody. Or if you have chords, then you can work out a melody that works with those chords. So starting with a melody, if I have a melody idea that's something like this, then I can work out chords that go with that melody by first working out which scale I'm using. And in this case, I'm using an F major scale, which is the notes F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. I need to work out which notes in the melody I want to play chords on. So if I want to play a chord on the first note, this is a C. Now I need to work out which chords in the key of F major include a C. So that will be F, that will be A minor, and that will be C major. So I can pick any one of those to go with that melody note, which in this case I'll choose F. Then, if I want to play a chord on the note G, for example, then I need to pick a chord that includes the note G. So in F major, G minor includes the note G, E diminished includes the note G, and C includes the note G. So I might go for G minor. Then if I want to play a chord on this note here, which is an A, I can do the same again. So I need to pick a chord that includes the note A. So I might choose D minor because a D minor has the notes D, F, and A, and that has an A in it. And then if I want to play a chord on the note G, then I can pick a chord that has the note G in it. And in this case, I might choose C. So all of that together. And then, like I said at the beginning of this video, it's just a case of making those chords sound more interesting, and maybe including some of those chord notes in the right hand as well. If you have chords, but you don't have a melody, then you can do the opposite by making sure that your melody is one of the chord notes when you change chords. So if I have the same chords, for example, in order to choose a melody, I could do something like play an F chord, so I might choose an A to be my melody note. And then a B flat, because that's in a G minor chord. And then an F, because that's in a D minor chord. And then an E, because that's in a C chord. But once you have both chords and a melody at the same time, then I would come up with another set of chords and another melody for each of the sections in the song that you're trying to write. And you might end up with something like this. So there you go, some very broad answers to some very broad questions. If you have a question, then you can send me it using the link in the description, and you can send me a video if you want to ask me something specific about your playing. But if you want to see 4 professional pianists play Moonlight Sonata and see why they play it so differently, then head on through and I will see you there.